Welcome to the Crystal Library, a pocket-sized portal into the magical, mysterious, and sometimes misunderstood world of crystals. I'm your host, Ashley, and each week I'll guide you as we explore one enchanting stone, its history, lore, healing properties, and one easy way to invite its magic into your everyday life. Whether you're crystal curious or deep in the woo, this is your space to learn, explore, and expand your connection to the mineral realm, one glittering gem at a time. So let's open the library and see which crystal wants to speak today. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Crystal Library. I'm Ashley, and I'm really looking forward to sharing a very special stone with you all today and a very, personal and special story associated with this stone. And we're just going to jump right into it. Okay. So let's go back. It was April 20th, 2001. It was nighttime. I was a freshman at the University of Kansas, riding in the back seat of a car with a few kids from my dorm, driving around out in the country. If you know what 420 means, you can probably imagine the general vibe of the evening. The year before, I'd been in a pretty bad car accident, bad enough that I was nervous every time I got in a car. I remember sitting in that back seat of that car, just trying to be okay, trying to stay calm. The guy driving, I didn't know him all that well, but he was someone who had recently handed me my first book on fairies, which, if you've heard my fairy episode, you know that that book opened a whole new realm for me, and one I've been living with ever since. This was a time in my life when I was experiencing my first real spiritual awakening. My friends and I were all reading the Celestine prophecy. We were talking about energy, the energy people carry, the way it moves between us. For the first time in my life, I was thinking about spirituality outside the walls of the Catholic Church I'd grown up in. I was starting to understand who I actually was. So there we are at night on a country road, and the guy driving tells me to reach down on the floor of the car. He said, "There's a crystal down there." He said to hold it and that it would help me feel calm. I reached down and I picked up a stone. I couldn't even see in the dark. It was small and smooth. One side had a somewhat triangular shape. It fit easily in my hand. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anything about its properties or its history or what it was supposed to do for me. I just held it. And somewhere in that drive, the anxiety quieted. I had this sense that everything was going to be okay. I now know that it was Blue Lace Agate. And here's the piece. I have that piece from way back in 2001 right here in my hand. I know now that it is specifically associated with the throat chakra, with finding your authentic voice, with accompanying people through the long process of learning to trust their own expression. I now know that the guy who handed it to me probably knew exactly what he was giving me, but I didn't know any of that in that car. And I've thought about that moment a lot over the years. The simple act of someone handing me a crystal, well, not necessarily handing me, but putting this crystal into my world when I was anxious. Was it the stone? Was it his intention? Was it the transfer of energy between us? It's hard to say, but I truly believe it's all a blend of all of these. This stone has been in my possession ever since. I still have it. There were years where it sat quietly in a bowl with other tumble stones, and it wasn't called upon for anything, but it made every move with me. It's been with me through everything. And now I'm here making an entire podcast episode about, well, not a podcast, well, a podcast episode about this stone, but now I have this whole entire podcast about crystals. And that small, smooth stone from the floor of a car in Kansas is still with me. Some things don't need to be in your hand every day to matter. Sometimes what matters is that you never let them go. This is the story of that stone. And if you've ever felt like your voice was somewhere inside you that you couldn't quite reach, I think this is the episode that's going to really mean something to you. Let's start by talking about what this stone actually is, because the way blue lace agate forms is not separate from what it does. For me, with crystals, the geology is always telling you something. Blue lace agate is a variety of chalcedony, which is a microcrystalline form of quartz. Its chemical formula is silicon dioxide, the same basic building block as most of the quartz family. It has a hardness of 7 on the Mohs scale, which makes it durable and well suited for jewelry and everyday care. Its structure is trigonal and it forms through an igneous process. Okay, but here's the part that matters. Blue lace agate forms inside cavities in rock. Silica-rich fluid seeps in, deposits a thin layer, and then it retreats. Then it comes back, deposits another layer, retreats again. This happens over millions of years, again and again, until those layers build into the banding that makes this stone so visually distinctive. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this little piece of blue lace agate I have has all these beautiful bands. Those pale blue and white waves you see when you look at a piece of blue lace agate, that's the record of millions of years of something returning to the same place and leaving a little more of itself behind each time. I want you to keep that image with you, okay? Blue lace agate was first discovered in Namibia in the 1960s, which makes it one of the more recently identified stones in the crystal world. Smaller deposits have since been found in South Africa, Brazil, India, China, and Australia, but Namibia is its origin, and Namibian species are still considered the finest quality. If you're sourcing blue lace agate, that is worth knowing. Where my piece came from, I will never know. For a stone that carries this much history, and we're going to get into that in a moment, its physical discovery is surprisingly recent, 1960, right? It was forming in the earth for millions of years before anyone found it, named it, or held it in their hand. It was already doing what it does long before we had language for it. The stone doesn't need to be discovered to exist. It doesn't need to be named to matter. It was already there. Most crystal content will tell you blue lace agate is a recently discovered stone without much history behind it. And in one sense, that is true. The specific variety we now call blue lace agate was identified from deposits in Namibia in the 1960s, but agate as a stone family has been known and traded across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa for thousands of years. Banded blue chalcedony material was almost certainly among the agates in circulation in ancient cultures long before anyone gave it a modern name. Modern crystal authors have drawn connections between blue lace agate's energy and much older traditions. Whether those traditions were working with this exact stone or something closely related, the resonance is worth exploring because the energy this stone carries has been recognized across multiple cultures and thousands of years under different names. So let's start in pre-Christian Scandinavia and Denmark. Before Christianity moved through Northern Europe and reshaped everything in its path, there was a Germanic earth mother goddess named Nerthus, documented by the Roman historian Tacitus around 98 CE. She was worshipped across multiple Scandinavian and Danish tribes. Her ritual was striking. She was kept veiled and transported across the land in a covered wagon. Moving through the community, her presence felt but never seen directly. She was sacred and unknowable. a goddess whose voice moved through the land itself rather than through any individual person. Modern crystal authors, including Cassandra Eason, have connected Blue Lace Agate's energy to this tradition. And whether those ancient communities were working with this exact stone or something closely related, the resonance makes sense to me. Because what Nerthus represents, a voice that moves through rather than from, that carries the weight of the earth behind it, is exactly what this stone has been pointing at across every tradition we have record of. And that points towards something I think is worth sitting with for just a moment. Most of us were taught that finding your voice means generating something from inside yourself, working up the courage, finding the confidence, pushing through until the words come out. But what if that's not actually how authentic voice works? What if the most genuine expression isn't something you manufacture, but something you become available to receive? That's not a new idea. It shows up across creative traditions, spiritual practices, and indigenous wisdom systems all over the world. This understanding that the human is not the origin of the deepest voice. The human is the opening, the vessel, the instrument. Blue lace agate has been associated with that quality across every tradition that has worked with it. Not the performance of voice, the reception of it. I think that's what makes this stone so much more interesting than its reputation as a simple, calming stone suggests. And it's exactly what I want you to keep in mind as we go deeper into what this stone actually does and why. Now we're going to get into it a little bit more. So let's talk about what this stone actually works on. Because I think the reason blue lace agate gets reduced to a calming stone is that people feel its effect without understanding what's underneath it. It does produce a sense of calm, but that calm is not the point. It's a byproduct of something much more specific happening. Blue lace agate works on the throat, not just as a chakra location, but as a physical place in the body where a very particular kind of wound lives. Here's what I mean by that. Most of us learned at some point, usually early, usually through the people whose approval mattered most to us, that certain expressions weren't safe, that speaking certain truths invited judgment, rejection, or punishment, that staying quiet was the smarter, safer choice. And when that lesson gets learned young enough and repeated often enough, the nervous system encodes it. The body begins to treat the impulse to speak authentically as a threat signal. And it responds accordingly. The vagus nerve runs directly through the throat. It is the primary nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for moving us from threat response into safety. When we chronically suppress authentic expression, we are chronically activating a stress response in the body. It isn't always obvious or dramatic. It can just be this quiet, persistent undercurrent of guardedness that becomes so familiar we stop noticing it's there. Over time, that shows up physically: neck and shoulder tension, tightness in the chest, thyroid dysregulation, a feeling that some people describe as suffocation, this sense of something wanting to move through and being stopped before it can get out. These aren't random symptoms. They are the body keeping the record of a voice that learned to stop itself before it started. Judy Hall writes specifically about this: the way fear of judgment, particularly within the parent-child relationship, creates a pattern of repression that blocks the throat chakra and can manifest as that feeling of suffocation in the chest. What begins as an emotional response to a specific relational dynamic becomes a whole body pattern that outlasts the original circumstances by decades. And this is where I want to reframe what blue lace agate is actually doing when people work with it. What it's doing, what I believe it's doing, is sending a signal to a nervous system that has been on guard for a very long time, a signal that says it's safe now, you can speak. Not because the external circumstances have necessarily changed, but because something in the body is finally getting permission to exhale. That's not a small thing. For people who learned early that their authentic expression was dangerous, that signal can take years to fully receive, sometimes decades. Blue lace agate doesn't rush that process. Remember those bands. That slow layering, one return at a time over millions of years. The stone works on the same timeline it was built on. It stays with you. It keeps sending the signal, and eventually, layer by layer, the pattern shifts. So how do you actually work with this stone? Because everything we've talked about, the geology, the history, the throat wound, the nervous system, it all has to land somewhere practical. That's the point. Understanding what a stone does is only useful if you know how to let it do it. Let's start with how you carry it and where you place it, because with blue lace agate, placement is actually meaningful. If you're working with it for creative inspiration, for opening the channel, for making yourself available to receive rather than perform, hold it in your left hand or your non-dominant hand, your receiving hand. You're not gripping it, you're just holding it, making yourself available. If you're working with it for speaking, a difficult conversation, a presentation, a moment where you know your nervous system is going to want to shut down right when you need your voice the most, hold it in your dominant hand or keep it in your pocket where you can reach it. The physical contact is the signal. It's a reminder to your body that it's safe to speak. As jewelry, blue lace agate is particularly well suited to necklaces and earrings. Keeping it in the energetic field of the throat throughout your day is a form of sustained, low-level support. This is actually one of the stones I'd recommend for everyday wear rather than reserving it for intentional practice sessions only. Its work is cumulative. The more consistent the contact, the more the nervous system receives the signal. For meditation, place it directly at the throat. You can also place it at the third eye if you're working specifically with clairaudience, with learning to hear guidance more clearly. Working with blue lace agate for clairaudience isn't necessarily about hearing voices or receiving dramatic transmission. For most people, it's much quieter than that. It's about learning to distinguish between your own mental noise, the second guessing, the old messages playing on repeat, and what's actually coming through underneath all of that. Blue lace agate helps quiet the interference so the signal becomes clearer. That's a practical skill as much as a mystical one. For altar and grid work, blue lace agate makes a strong centerpiece stone for any intention around voice, community, or authentic expression. If you're working on calling in your people, building the community around the work you're here to do, this is a stone worth placing at the center of that grid, or like a crystal grid. It carries the energy of voice as transmission, of expression that moves through you towards someone who needs to receive it. A note on form. Tumbled stones are ideal for everyday carry and handwork. Raw or rough pieces carry a slightly different energy and work well on the altar. If you're drawn to jewelry, look for pieces where the banding is visible. That banding is the whole story of this stone. You want to be able to see it. And finally, a word on sourcing. Namibian blue lace agate is the gold standard. The finest quality material still comes from its origin deposit. As with many popular stones, dyed imitations exist in the market. Authentic blue lace agate has a soft, natural pale blue color with white or gray banding. If the color looks too saturated or too uniform, trust that instinct. I want to bring you back to that car for a moment. It was night. I was a freshman in college, riding in the back seat on a country road, nervous in my body, my spirituality just beginning to unlock. Someone told me to reach down for a stone. I couldn't even see in the dark. I didn't know its name. I didn't know what it was supposed to do. I just held it. And something settled. I didn't know for years what that stone actually was or what it was working on. I didn't know about the throat chakra or the vagus nerve or nerthus or any of it. I just knew that holding it helped. And so I kept it through every move, every transition, every version of myself I've cycled through in the last 25 years, and there's been a lot. It sat in a bowl for long stretches of time. It wasn't always in my hand, but it was always with me. And now here I am making a podcast, using my voice every single week, twice a week, talking about the things I spent most of my life not saying out loud. I don't think that's a coincidence. Blue Lace Agate works on a long timeline, just like those bands, formed layer by layer, one slow return at a time over millions of years. The work this stone does is cumulative. It's not dramatic. It doesn't force anything open. It just stays. And it keeps sending the same quiet signal until the body finally believes it's safe to receive it. If you're somewhere in that process right now, if you're in the middle of learning to trust your own voice or just beginning to understand that you even have one worth trusting, I want you to know that's not a small thing you're doing. That's some of the most important work a person can do. And you don't have to do it quickly. Look at me. It's taken me 25 years. This stone will stay with you for as long as you need it to. So what's the big crystal energy of Blue Lace Agate? Blue Lace Agate has big crystal energy because your most authentic voice was never something you had to manufacture. It was always something you just had to become available to receive. This week on Big Crystal Energy, we're sitting inside one question. What does it actually take to finally use your voice? I hope you'll carry that question into the next conversation too. Until next time, bye! Thank you for visiting the Crystal Library. I hope today's stone offered just the magic you needed. If you loved this episode, share it with your favorite mystic and tag me on Instagram at mystical.mama.ash or at Big Crystal Energy Podcast. And if you're feeling generous, leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps this magic reach more curious souls. Until next time, keep your crystals close and your intuition closer.